In progress. Great. Okay. So welcome back. Good to see you all, or at least I see some of you. It is helpful for us to see each other. So if you would like to turn on your video, we would all appreciate that. This is the second session of our series, our Lunch and Learn series on God. The last session, we talked about sources, perspectives on God that come straight out of the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. The goal here, and today we'll be talking about sources from the Talmud and from Midrash. The goal here, of course, is to give us all language for sort of understanding at least what our tradition teaches about God as we move in the ancient world. As we move forward, this series is constructed chronologically. Each time, at each subsequent session, we'll be talking about a later period in Jewish life, where we'll eventually get to some modern perspectives, and that of course is where we all are, I think. But in order to understand modernity and modern conceptions of God, of course, we have to start from the position of knowing what are the ancient perspectives. So hence, as I mentioned, we spoke about last time about some of the sources from the perspectives on God that you find in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible. Among the things, well, the goals here, as I said, is to give us all language to understand how Judaism has classically understood God, so that we can grapple with these things as we move forward, both in this group and then in the other spheres of our lives as Jewish people. If you'd missed the first session and you'd like to see it, it actually is available. The Zoom, we recorded the Zoom session, and I'm going to actually put that in the chat so you can. So if you want to find it, if you want to copy it and put it in your squirrel it away for later, you could. If you missed the first one and you'd like to watch it, you can find that here, and so that's in the chat. And also, I'm going to put up the link to the source sheet we used last time about sources from the Tanakh as well. I also have a source sheet today for sources from the Talmud, so we'll look at that today. But these are both from last time. So if you missed it, you wanna do that. Don't watch it now. Just stay with us here, but keep it for later. It's also it should be available on the Beth Shalom website somewhere as well. And in fact, the Zoom recording is also on the Beth Shalom YouTube page. And if you didn't know that Beth Shalom has a YouTube page, now you know. So, or channel, I guess it's called a channel, right? It's television after all, arguably. So our goals here, like I said, is to give us language to see how Judaism has perceived God in our sources classically. Again, to the end of giving us all something that we can latch onto for understanding God for ourselves. Now, the most important thing, I think, for all of us, the most important ground rule here is to sort of be open to whatever comes our way. We're not accustomed to talking about God. We don't talk about God that much. We do a lot of mentioning of God in various ways, in various brachot and tefillot and so forth. But they often the language goes by so fast that we're not really thinking about it. And let's face it, talking about God makes us sometimes uncomfortable. One of my teachers at the Jewish Theological Seminary, Rabbi Neil Gilman, was very insistent that we do have to talk about God, that we have to engage in what he called God talk, because that is healthy. Now, of course, that doesn't. What I'm going to say says nothing about what you might believe or understand. That really is up to you. And to some extent, Judaism doesn't really have strong opinions about what you should believe. Rather, in fact, there's a good case to be made that the way that you understand is really the way you understand God is entirely personal. It is helpful to craft a theological structure for yourself that works for you, and I know many of us have done that. But the best way to approach this material is to be open about it. Try not to be dismissive. Just try to take it and see what comes your way and see what kind of thought process it produces in your own head. Understanding, by the way, that around the screen and around the world, everybody is on their own personal journey with respect to how they understand God and the role of the divine in our lives. And I'm sure, as you all know, when you look back over your own life, your views have certainly changed. Mine have changed and developed, and they continue to do so as well. So without further ado, let me ask, actually, does anyone have any follow-up questions from last time? I know that was a month ago. I don't know if anyone has anything that they were wondering about since the last time we met and you want to ask right now. Okay, I'm not seeing a whole lot of activity, so I guess those are called Zoom crickets. So I'm going to move on then to this week. Before we begin our study today, we should say the bracha for Torah study. That bracha ends with la'asok divrei Torah, which means to engage with words of Torah. So please recite the bracha with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise you, God, who has given us this framework of mitzvot that has enabled us to fill our lives with holiness, and in particular, the imperative to engage with words of Torah. So I'm putting also into the chat. So this is this link that I'm putting up right now. So that might be for some of you. It's the second Sefaria link on the screen. Is the link to our sources for today. So you might want to open that up. I'll also put it on the screen. But before we get to that, I have to put up a timeline. Because as you all know, as many of you know, I love a good timeline. I never met a timeline I didn't like. And it's actually really important for us, actually, as Jews. I think it's very important for us to understand where we fit in to this timeline, because we at any given moment of Jewish life, we are, yes, we're certainly at the far right over here. Can you see my little arrow if I'm pointing over there? I think you can. Yes, where I'm indicating. Yes. Okay. So we are over here at the far right, but at various moments in our rituals, in our learning, we're at different points along this line. In fact, Judaism actually even has roots that go even further back than 3,000 years ago. The earliest parts of the Tanakh are maybe 3,200 years old. But much of the Torah, the biblical books are being written in this period where it says here biblical period. So in the mostly the first half of the first millennium BCE. And so again, we covered a lot of that stuff last time. The most important date for us today on here is actually 70 CE right there, which is the turning point for everything in Jewish life. That is when the Second Temple in Jerusalem is destroyed. Remember that prior to the year 70, well, the standard story, and I'm not sure if this is entirely accurate given some scholarly discoveries in recent years, but basically Judaism was a hierarchical, centralized tradition until the Romans destroyed that temple in Jerusalem. There was only one temple. There was the first temple, which was destroyed by the Babylonians back here, and then it was rebuilt. And then if you go to Jerusalem today, of course, you will see some of the remains of that second temple that are still standing on the complex known as the Temple Mount. And of course, the Dome of the Rock is on top. That's a Muslim shrine, but nonetheless, the outer retaining wall is still there, and some other features as well. But that the Romans destroyed the temple. We never rebuilt the temple. What happened in the temple, of course, was sacrifice, and that was the essential way that Jews interacted with God prior to the destruction in the year 70. So. Our sources last time about Bible from the Bible, from the Tanakh, talked about God in a much more sort of descriptive way than the sources that we'll see today. God was described as having bodily features, could walk in the Garden of Eden, and could talk with human beings, spoke, with people like Abraham and Moshe, and of course the prophets, spoke in Moses' case, face to face, right? Panim el panim, the text tells us, when Moses is up on Mount Sinai. And so God has a physical presence and has physical characteristics and interacts with human beings, communicating directly. And God acts in the world, and even in the later literature of the Tanakh, we find that God has this sort of active role as being sort of a protector and defender of the Israelites and of humankind, of being the one who heals the sick and strengthens armies and so forth, and punishing the wicked. That is very much a part of this sort of active God. Even over the course of the Tanakh, we see a gradual distancing of God, right? So in the Garden of Eden, God is right there. God is walking in the garden, right? And then God is interacting with the patriarchs and so forth. But as we get to the end of the Torah and then further into the later books, we see that God is becomes a sort of a more distant. God only communicates to the prophets, for example, and not to the king. When the kings in Israel only begin around in here, about 3,000 years ago. Remember, a lot of the purported time of the patriarchs and so forth is all out back in here. But by the time we get in here, God only communicates to the prophet, right? And so when we get to over in here now, God hasn't spoken for a long time, and the challenge that the rabbis are facing. Remember, what is a rabbi? A rabbi is a teacher. And the whole rabbinic enterprise prior to this period in here, there aren't really rabbis. That word rabbi, by the way, some of you heard me say before, is actually it comes from an Akkadian word for a military rank. So too, by the way, the word chazan, both rabbi and chazan are names of military ranks in Akkadian. But prior to this time, Judaism is centralized. It is focused on the temple cult. It is focused on the work of the priesthood. The way you interacted with God was you brought your sacrifice to the priest. The priest offers it up on the altar, and only in Jerusalem. Mostly only in Jerusalem, and that was your interaction with God. Now, what happens here when the Romans destroy the temple here in 70 is that now we have to scramble and figure out, well, what comes next? So this group of scholars known as rabbis are starting to decide, well, the way that we're going to maintain our the Jewish future, to make Judaism sustainable, to use current lingo, is to create a new method, a new type of Judaism. And that type of Judaism is going to depend on learning and teaching and learning, and giving from generation to generation this portable, decentralized the set of wisdom, collected knowledge that is going to be interpreted and reinterpreted. And so the rabbis create this idea of, well, we can't sacrifice anymore, so certainly we're going to learn our tradition and carry it with us in our hearts wherever we go, because it's no longer going to be focused in Jerusalem. That's done. And we're going to make sure that we teach and learn, and we're also going to pray, and prayer is going to replace sacrifice to some extent. So that's what happens moving forward. And then they write the Talmud, which is generally in this period here from about 100 to 500 CE is about the time that the Talmud is being written. And it's being written in Israel and then in Babylonia, also known as Iraq. And that is going to become the basis for what we know of as Judaism. Okay, so what's practiced prior to 70 is not really Judaism. It's an ancient Israelite religion. And then moving forward. So this will also include, by the way, a very different approach to God. So we'll see that in our sources. Really what the rabbis are doing is they're trying to figure out, what do we do with the Jews? What are the Jews going to do now that the temple is no longer functioning, now that the whole, what we knew before is all gone? And so, as you'll see from our sources, they're creating this sense of continuum. They're trying to create the sense of continuum with the past, and they're giving themselves credit for doing it. That's part of the rabbinic enterprise, to say, well, we really represent the tradition now, even though there are no rabbis in the Tanakh, right? No rabbis in the Hebrew Bible. It doesn't exist. But the rabbis are creating this story that connects them to the past and will be sustainable for the future of Judaism. And we know they were dramatic or tremendously successful because we're still here. Right? Despite the fact that despite exile and dispersion and oppression and persecution and pogroms and all that, we are sitting here in the year, what year is it? 2022, 5783, and we're still learning and teaching and talking about and reading the Torah every year and still doing what we do, praying, all our rituals, and so their system works. Their system works. So part of that is this sense of, well, how do we approach God now that God's not, waiting for us to sacrifice? What's God doing? How do we understand this God now? And as you will see, God is definitely a part of the picture, according to the rabbis, but not in the physical acting in the world way that we see in the Tanakh. Okay, so that's very important. When we look at rabbinic sources about God, we'll see that God is there, in fact, here with us, but also completely not visible. We're not sure exactly where God is, what God's place is, what God's role is. We just know that God is there. Sometimes God seems to take an interest in human affairs, sometimes not, as we shall see. So without further ado, I'll tell you what, we're going to switch over to the sheet. Like I said, I put this sheet in the link to the sheet in the chat. So if you'd rather open it on your own screen so you can flip back and forth and you don't have to be stuck at what I'm looking at, you can do that as well. So without further ado, can I get a volunteer to read for us this passage? Now, Avot Rabbi Natan is not from right after 70 CE. It's actually Avot Rabbi Natan is a midrashic commentary on Pirkei Avot, which is in the Mishnah. So Mishnah is very early. It's 100 to 200 CE. But this commentary comes from 5 or 6 centuries later, probably, we don't know exactly. And yet it's still very much in this rabbinic mode of like, we're trying to figure out how to explain to the Jews what to do. Can I get a volunteer? Actually, if it's okay, I see Eileen, she's next on my screen. Eileen, would you be willing to, can you unmute oh, wait, I'm asking you to unmute. Let's see, does that work? Can you unmute? Oh, no. Oh, there you are. Okay, great.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
You can hear you.
Okay. Once Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai left Jerusalem, and Rabbi Yehoshua followed after him. And he saw the holy temple destroyed. Rabbi Yehoshua said, "Woe to us, for this is destroyed. The place where all of Israel's sins are forgiven." Rabbi Yohanan said to him, "My son, do not be distressed, for we have a form of atonement just like it." And what is it? Acts of kindness, as it said, for I desire kindness, not a well-being offering.
Great. So this is just such a perfect encapsulation of what the rabbis are trying to do. Thank you, Eileen, for reading. So Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabban actually just means our rabbi. I don't know why some rabbis are known as Rabban and not Rav or Rabbi. Rabbi means my Rav. Rabban means our Rav. But in any case, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is a key figure in this transitional period between the temple time and the post-temple time. And he and Rabbi Yehoshua are strolling around Jerusalem in the wake of destruction. Again, remember, this is written centuries later, so it could be that this story was floating around for a while and then it's eventually captured in Avot Rabbi Natan. We don't know. But in any case, the story has them wandering around Jerusalem and they see that the destroyed temple and they say, "Ach, what are we going to do? What woe is us? We have no way of atoning for our sins." And Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai says to him, "Don't worry about it. We've got a better way, and that way is chesed. Acts of loving kindness, acts of loving kindness." And the quote from Psalms there, by the way, you can actually see in the Hebrew, Shnei Amar, as it is written, Ki chesed chafatzti velo zavach, for I have desired chesed, acts of loving kindness, and not sacrifice. And that's a quote from, interestingly enough, it's a quote from Psalms. So once again, whenever the rabbis can, whenever they're trying to make some kind of statement about what it is, how we interact with God or our ancient tradition, they're going to pin it on something in the Tanakh. They're going to take a quote because they're trying to demonstrate that what we do is the right way of understanding the Tanakh. Okay, what happened when the temple was standing? Yes, that was, we know that was important, but we don't have that anymore. So now we're going to take what's in the Tanakh and we're going to make it ours at this time. Okay, so again, these are rabbis who are first century rabbis, even though again the text comes from later, but they're saying we're connecting to our ancient tradition, and the future is this, and that future is God no longer needs sacrifices, or maybe God never even really needed sacrifices. Rather, God needs us to be good to each other, to practice chesed, acts of loving kindness. Okay, Eileen, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. I think you can probably condense that whole idea into from our first encounter with God through Moses. Um, God essentially named us, and then the rabbis later on decided that since we know who we are, we define ourselves by what we do.
Mhm. Right.
So that's what makes us choose.
Right. So certainly it's an essential part of the Torah that mitzvot, that doing the acts of the specific acts of that are mentioned in the Torah is certainly an aspect of what it means to be Jewish. The rabbis actually take it to a different level, and in fact, yes, mitzvot are important. What we do is important, and there are many commandments in the Torah. But when you start to read the Torah closely, you realize that what you might be seeing, by the way, is where it's hard not to see the Torah text through the rabbinic lens. And we all know that mitzvot are important. And we know, for example, that saying Shema 3 times a day or twice a day is very important, morning and evening. Although when you read the text without the rabbinic lens, it's not clear that that's what the Torah is trying to get us to do. The primary thing that the Torah spends a lot of time talking about, of course, is sacrifice. A lot of detail about sacrifice, nothing about prayer. A little bit about foods you can eat and you can't eat, and some things about Shabbat. We think of, by the way, Shabbat as being this long list of 39 categories of prohibited work, but that's only an act of interpretation by the rabbis. In later generations, the Torah only says a few things about what to do or not to do on Shabbat. Torah says you should not light a fire. The Torah also seems to think that carrying wood in public is a bad idea. But other than that, it's not really clear. It doesn't say specifically you shall not tear or spend money. It doesn't say any of those things. That's all rabbinic interpretation. So once again, yes, there's the framework of mitzvot, but the rabbis have to modify it to make it work for their times and their place. But thank you. Good. By the way, so if anyone raises their hand, so I may not see it. I think I might get a note if there's chat, but I don't. If you want to raise your hand, so to say something, you might want to put up. There's the raise hand function. Please do that, because that way you'll jump to the top of my. I can only see a few faces, so I can't see if you're waving at me. But use the raise hand function. Okay. The questions are always important, so we're going to move on to the next one, which is I love this text. I've taught it many times. Some of you might have learned this with me, but it's really one of the most important texts in the rabbinic tradition. Sheldon, would you be willing to read for us? Then this it's sort of longish, and I'll probably interrupt you, but please read for us.
Okay, can you hear me?
Oh, and let me just introduce this by saying, yes, we can hear you. Let me introduce this by saying that it takes place in a Beit Midrash, an ancient study hall, and they're arguing about whether a certain type of oven is kosher, and this oven is complicated for various reasons that don't matter. But just know there's concern about whether it's called the oven of Achnai, and they disagree. The rabbis disagree about whether or not it's kosher. Rabbi Eliezer says it's not kosher, and all the other rabbis disagree with him, and they say it is. Okay, that's what you need to know from the outset. Please go ahead, Sheldon. Thank you.
The sages taught on that day, when they discussed the oven of Achnai, Rabbi Eliezer answered all possible answers in the world to support his opinion, but the rabbis did not accept his explanations from him.
By the way, so again, see that it's already set up as there's one rabbi, like a lone voice, and then all the other rabbis disagree. So clearly, like, you're going to see there's some kind of like a political angle to this, but go ahead.
After failing to convince the rabbis logically, Rabbi Eliezer said to them, "If the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, this carob tree will prove it. The carob tree was uprooted from its place 100 cubits, and some say 400 cubits. The rabbi said to him, one does not cite halachic proof from the carob tree." Okay,
so what's going on? Rabbi Eliezer, who's got a great relationship with God, wherever God is or whatever God is doing, Rabbi Eliezer said, "Look, I know I'm right. God knows I'm right, and God's going to make that carob tree pick itself up and move." And it not only did it move, there's disagreement about how far it actually moved, but it definitely moved. And then all the other rabbis say, no, we don't accept carob trees as being proof of any halachic law, any matter in Jewish law. Okay, keep going, please.
Rabbi Eliezer said to them, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, the stream will prove it. The water in the stream turned backward and began flowing in the opposite direction. They said to him, one does not cite halachic proof from a stream.
Same thing, the stream reversed. Okay, pretty impressive, right? The stream reverses itself. And they all say, no, we don't accept streams. Sorry, moving on. Nothing to see here, folks. Yep.
Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, the walls of the study hall will prove it. The walls of the study hall leaned inward and began to fall.
And remember, by the way, they're in the Beit Midrash. They're there, and suddenly the walls are caving in. Okay, this is not a good situation. Go ahead.
Rabbi Yehoshua scolded the walls and said to them, if Torah scholars are contending with each other in matters of halacha, what is the nature of your involvement in this dispute?
Look, walls, stay out of it. Yeah, this is not your business. Okay, this is between us. Okay, all right, keep going. Yeah.
The Gemara relates the walls did not fall because of the deference due Rabbi Yehoshua, but they did not straighten because of the deference due Rabbi Eliezer, and they still remain leaning.
So the walls, actually, they know these characters because they see them every day. And the walls are like, well, Rabbi Yeshua is he's important, but so too is Rabbi Eliezer. So we're gonna remain like half leaned in. It makes me wonder, by the way, if there's an old story about this old Beit Midrash, the old Beit Midrash where the walls were falling in, and that's how this came about. Anyway, just an interesting. Okay, so still, we're not done yet. Keep going.
Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, heaven will prove it. A divine voice emerged from heaven and said, why are you differing with Rabbi Eliezer, as the halacha is in accordance with his opinion in every place that he expresses an opinion?
Okay, heavenly voice. The Hebrew word, by the way, is bat kol, which literally means an echo. But this heavenly voice comes from heaven. So it's the voice of God. The voice of God says, why are you disagreeing with Rabbi Eliezer? He's right. And what happens? Rabbi Yehoshua stands up. Go ahead.
Rabbi Yehoshua stood on his feet and said, it is written, it is not in heaven. The Gemara asks, what is the relevance of the phrase, it is not in heaven, in this context?
Just to be clear, by the way, that the reference is, you see it says Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 12. The Hebrew is lo bashamayim hi, it is not in the heaven. And that's a reference to a passage in Deuteronomy which says, by the way, you can handle these mitzvot. Lo bashamayim hi, it's not up in heaven that you have to be heavenly in order to fulfill the mitzvot. Rather, therefore, us down here. You can do it. They're in your hands. Go on.
Rabbi Yirmiyah says, since the Torah was already given at Mount Sinai, we do not regard a divine voice, as you already wrote at Mount Sinai in the Torah, after a majority to incline. Since the majority of rabbis disagreed with Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, the halacha is not ruled in accordance with his opinion.
Okay, so what they're doing, again, that may not have been the intent. When it says after a majority to incline, that's actually don't follow the majority is actually what the text says. But they're saying that it's actually our voices, our human voices, are more important than God's voice. What we do, we're the rabbis. We're making the decisions here. And what we do, our opinion is authoritative. And if we all say that that's not kosher, even if God says that the oven is kosher, sorry, it's the other way around. If we say it's kosher and God says it's not, then you know what? You have to go with us. We're the voices down here. We are. So again, very different idea about our relationship with God. Humans have some kind of, we have the ability to shape our tradition. Very different from what's in the Torah, where God is this stern lawgiver up on Mount Sinai, right? Let's go on. There's a little bit more just to put a nail in the coffin, if you will.
The Gemara relates, years after, Rabbi Natan encountered Elijah the prophet and said to him, what did the Holy One, blessed be he, do at this time when Rabbi Yehoshua issued his declaration? Elijah said to him, the Holy One, blessed be he, smiled and said, my children have triumphed over me. My children have triumphed over me.
So it's interesting. God is actually kind of proud. He's proud. God is proud of the fact that the people have won, that the human beings have triumphed. God smiles and says, you know what? They're right. It's great that, by the way, it's Eliyahu Hanavi who just wanders in and out. He's a character. Eliyahu is a kind of character in throughout rabbinic literature, and he pops in at certain times. Today, we expect Eliyahu to pop in at every Brit Milah. That's why it's the Kisei Shel Eliyahu. The Eliyahu's chair is the one that the Sandek sits on when he holds the baby that's about to be circumcised. Of course, we also invoke Eliyahu at Pesach and also at Saturday night. Eliyahu just pops in and out of Jewish life. And here he is to give this message that, God was proud. God was proud of the fact that human beings ultimately realized that the power is in their hands. So again, very different kind of God than we see in Tanakhic sources. Any follow-up questions to this? This is a great piece. It's a great text. Every rabbi loves this text. Any questions about this? Yeah, go ahead, Eileen.
Yeah, when you were saying that when the rabbis challenged the idea of God, the authority of God, I mean, the word that popped into my mind was the vad, excuse me. It's I'm not going to go dig into that one, but the idea that rabbis are right. I mean, they consider themselves the ultimate source.
Well, so there are many aspects to that idea that we have human the human ability to reinterpret. And yes, I mean, who knows what God actually thinks of what we do or how we have interpreted Judaism or distorted it or whatever. Clearly, what Judaism is not what's described in the Tanakh, and so yes, we make the tradition. It is interesting that in Jewish life today, of course, since the in the last couple of centuries, when you have a great division between those who feel like you have to hew to the way things have always been done. Of course, there is no such thing as the way we always did it. The way we always did it, if it goes back a couple of decades, that's pretty impressive. But there is this sort of question of like, how much autonomy do we have in terms of our observance of tradition? I don't want to get too far afield, but yes, that is certainly in play here. In that, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, there was one other thing earlier when you said that God only spoke to the prophets and not to the kings. I was just wondering if that went back to the idea when David was first declared king, the Jews, that God was reluctant to have men appoint a king among themselves. And I'm wondering if that's the basis for why he only spoke to the prophets.
Yeah, there's certainly when the people ask for a king, there's certainly this reluctance. It's complicated because even before the prophets, God only speaks to the judge. So Samuel is a judge, and Shmuel is the one who carries the word of God to the people, saying, "You don't need a king. You don't want a king. Kings are bad. They're going to tax you and take your children for the army and whatever." Right. Yeah. So certainly but that is also, as you point out, that's part of that distancing that you see in the Tanakh. Whereas at the start, God is very much involved in human affairs, and God gradually moves away. Let's go on to the next one. So this is also this is also one of my favorite midrashim. It's a great text from the Talmud. Chris, would you be willing to read this? This is about Moses goes up on Mount Sinai and sees God doing something interesting with the Torah text. Go ahead.
So Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, when Moses ascended on high, he found the Holy One, blessed be he, sitting and tying crowns on the letters of the Torah. Moses said before God, Master of the universe, who is preventing you from giving the Torah without these additions? And God said to him, there is a man who is destined to be born after several generations, and Akiva ben Yosef is his name. He is destined to derive from each and every thorn of these crowns, mounds upon mounds of halachot. Okay,
so what's this talking about? Now it's a little ridiculous. This is very rabbinic. Some of these midrashim are it's a fantasy, it's a rabbinic fantasy. Because of course on Mount Sinai it's described as like it's stone. So I don't know how God is putting crowns in the stone, but in any case, if you see a Torah scroll today, you'll see that the text of the Torah has these little crowns on many of the letters. Sometimes they have 3 points, sometimes they have 1, but they're little decorative features. And God is putting these things in the text of the Torah. And Moses says, "Why are you doing that?" And God says, Rabbi Akiva, who's going to live 2 millennia or a millennium and a half after you, is going to interpret lots of stuff from these things. I'm not telling you what these are about, but you should just know that somebody in the future who's going to know a lot of stuff is going to interpret them for you. Okay, so what happens?
So Moses said before God, Master of the universe, show him to me. God said to him, return behind you. Moses went and sat at the end of the 8th row in Rabbi Akiva's study hall and did not understand what they were saying. Moses' strength waned as he thought his Torah knowledge was deficient. When Rabbi Akiva arrived at the discussion of one matter, his students said to him, my teacher, from where do you derive this? Rabbi Akiva said to them, it is a halacha transmitted to Moses from Sinai. When Moses heard this, his mind was put at ease, as this too was part of the Torah that he was to receive.
Actually, it's funny. I've never thought about this before. Thank you, Chris. I've never thought about this before, that Moses is the one who talks with God. Rabbi Akiva, God's not sitting in Rabbi Akiva's classroom. Remember what I said about how God moves from this sort of the Tanakhic view is that God interacts with the individuals in that time, but the time we get to rabbinic literature, God is far away. We don't know where God is when Moses is sitting in Rabbi Akiva's classroom. But in any case, so he can't understand what's going on. And then Rabbi Akiva says, "Oh, Moshe got this on Mount Sinai," and Moshe thinks, it's not bad. I like that. Okay, it's good. So then go on. So Moshe goes back to God.
Moses returned and came before the Holy One, blessed be he, and said before him, Master of the universe, you have a man as great as this, and yet you still choose to give Torah through me. Why? God said to him, be silent. This intention arose before me. Hey,
who are you? Who are you to ask me what I'm doing? Come on. I'm God here, okay, enough with your silly questions. I'm done with you. Go back down Mount Sinai. We'll catch up at some later time. God still maintains this sense of, and again, this is somewhat rabbinic. We find this in other parts of the Tanakh as well. This idea that God is unknowable. We don't know why God makes the choices God makes. And there's more to the story. So please, last paragraph, thanks.
Moses said before God, Master of the universe, you have shown me Rabbi Akiva's Torah. Now show me his reward.
Oh, no.
And God said to him, return to where you were. Moses went back and saw that they were weighing Rabbi Akiva's flesh in a butcher shop, as Rabbi Akiva was tortured to death by the Romans. Moses said before him, Master of the universe, this is Torah and this is its reward. And God said to him, be silent, this intention arose before me.
So just to flip back to our timeline for a moment, we're talking about the Bar Kokhba revolt, the Hadrianic persecutions, which happened about 50, 60 years after the destruction of the temple. And Rabbi Akiva is a key figure in the Bar Kokhba rebellion, which is, as I said, right in here. And in fact, some of you may know that the traditional story that we read on Yom Kippur afternoon in the martyrology or Ela Eskara section of the Machzor, of the Yom Kippur liturgy, is this story of 10 rabbis from that period that are all murdered by the Romans, including the great Rabbi Akiva, who is thought to be, the greatest interpreter of Torah ever. And so we know coming into this story, well, those of us who know something about rabbinic history know that Rabbi Akiva's end is not good. Right? And yet he's the one who's interpreting that every jot and tittle, all the little crowns in the Torah. And so we know that it has to end this way. Why is it that you give, Moses asks, why do you give this gift of interpretation to this guy and then let him be massacred, but let him be slaughtered by the Romans? And God says, hey, who are you to ask me these questions? Leave me alone. Right? It's not up to you. Maintaining this kind of mystery. And the rabbis, of course, are struggling. Remember, what I also see here is this struggle of they're still trying to answer the question of why was the temple destroyed? What happened to our tradition? God gave us the Torah and all these instructions, and now we can't do any of them. What are we going to do? And so they don't know. They don't know. I didn't include another great passage about why bad things happen to good people, which is in the Talmud as well, because the rabbis are asking this question. They're asking the same things that we ask today. Where is God? Where was God during the Shoah, the Holocaust? Where was God during Hurricane Katrina? Where was God on October 27th, 2018? Right? We are asking these questions, and there's no good answer to the question of why there is suffering in the world, especially even for good, righteous people who follow the rules. They don't know. They're just, you could see them, though, wrestling with this idea of this distant God, who is also, in some ways, trying to care for human life the best in a way that we seem to hope that that's how things will play out. Of course, we just don't know, and so you could see that struggle evident here. I see that Maddie has raised her hand. Would you like to tell Maddie? You got a question?
I just had a thought. I just feel like when we're talking about God's power in the universe, it's almost like I feel like from the conversations that I've had in more like academic spaces, there's always this understanding like, is God all powerful? Is God sometimes powerful? Is God, always compassionate sometimes? Does it depend on the situation? Like there's that big question, I feel like, for me.
Right.
That's all.
So yeah, actually, thank you for bringing that up. Again, we could probably do a whole couple of hours on theodicy, the philosophical question of why, if God is all powerful and God is all good, why is there suffering in the world? Why must people die of terminal diseases, let's say? And so that's a question that no religion, of course, can adequately answer. The book of Job, by the way, which is in the Tanakh, of course, answers the question the same way that is answered here, which is basically, who are you to ask the question? How dare you? Right? Again, not very satisfying. But it is a question that we continue to struggle with, and like I said, it's another session. But it is an ongoing question that humans have about God. If God is there and God is all powerful and God is and God is good, why do we suffer? I have, if you want to read more about this, one idea is the idea that is put forward by Rabbi Harold Kushner in the book Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. Rabbi Harold Kushner is a conservative rabbi who lost a child who had this disease that made him age very quickly and die at a very young age. And he lost his faith for many years, and he wrote that book as a result of that experience. Audrey, you have a question?
I do. When God says, be silent, this intention arose before me, does that mean that God is saying this wasn't my doing, it was already in place before I started doing what I'm doing?
Yeah, that's a fair question, and I don't think we can interpret this any other way other than to say that the rabbis don't really know how God works. And they're okay with that. Look, the Torah has a very simple type of theology with respect to our deeds and our reward. The Torah says if you do the mitzvot, you get the reward. If you don't do the mitzvot, you don't get the reward, right? If you the second paragraph of the Shema, which we say twice a day, says if you follow the mitzvot, you will get rain in its time, and you'll have good fields, and you'll live and thrive, and your animals will reproduce, and you'll do great. You'll have lots of food and wine and whatever and oil. And if you don't do that, the skies will dry up and the earth will dry up, and you'll suffer and die. It says that in the second paragraph of the Shema. By the way, Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan didn't like that theology, so he took it out and replaced the second paragraph of the Shema with something else. And God bless the Reconstructionists. We in the conservative movement tend to be liturgically conservative, so we keep that in, although of course we say it silently. And so again, it's not clear what they're saying, other than God said, "Hey, that's what came into my mind." And that's the way I played this, that's all we can really say. And the rabbis are on some level, they're sort of reinforcing this idea. We don't know how God works. Okay. Let's move on. Maddie, would you be willing to read, since you're next on my screen, would you be able to read the next one? This is short. Now we're going to move into a sort of a different understanding of God with respect to where is God, or how do we find God? Go ahead. This is Midrash B'midbar Rabbah, which is later, but still certainly in the category of rabbinic interpretation.
Mm-hmm. An idolater asked Rabban Gamliel, why was the Holy One, blessed be God, revealed to Moses in the burning bush? Rabban Gamliel replied to him, if God had been revealed in a carob tree or a fig tree, you would have asked me the same thing, and I could not send you away without an answer. This teaches you that there is no place in the world devoid of the Shekhinah.
Right, in Hebrew, she'en makom ba'aretz panui min hashchina. God is everywhere, and I'm sure many of us were taught that in Hebrew school or whatever. We were taught that, well, God is everywhere. So the argument here is that the Shekhinah, God's presence, is with us all the time, right? And again, that's very, very different from the way the Tanakh sees God because God's presence is God is, in some cases, God is actually speaking to characters, or God is leading the Israelites through the desert by putting a pillar of cloud or a pillar of fire. And God is also interacting through communications, but God is not located, amongst the people. The rabbis want to place God down here with us. That's very important to them. And so, yes, the burning bush, but also it could have been a carob tree, or it could have been a fig tree, or it could have been anywhere, because God is in any place that God wants to be. And really, God is everywhere. There is no place in the world where the Shekhinah, God's presence, is not found. By the way, and the importance of the word Shekhinah here. Yes, Beth, I see your hand. Just one second. The importance of the word Shekhinah, that is derived from the Hebrew word leshaken, which means to dwell. Your dwelling place. In fact, if you live in Israel, your neighborhood is known as a shechuna. That's from that root. But also the Mishkan, the portable sanctuary that the Israelites are instructed to build in the desert. The Mishkan is the dwelling place of God. Okay, and they saw God as being located in the Mishkan, and God's presence, God's Shekhinah, dwelling in that place. But this midrash is telling us, it's that we're way past that. Now, we have to understand God is being around us at all times. Yes, Beth, go ahead.
I was just wondering, why would an idolater say, "Why was the Holy One blessed be he," if this person is an idolater?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think you could very easily, it's worth, pointing out that the term in Hebrew for an idolater is oved kochavim, one who worships the stars. Okay, so you'll see that that's typical rabbinic language, and oved kochavim is an idolater. I think the suggestion is it's a scoffer, one who's scoffing. Well, why was God in this bush anyway? I mean, maybe that means that the bush itself was a god. I think that's probably the implication, is that, as an idolater, I know that God is there's a God of the bush, and there's a God of the cloud, and there's a God of the rock and whatever. So I think that's what's going on here, is the idolater is saying, clearly there's a burning bush, so that was a godly bush, but the response has to be, well, God is everywhere. God was not specifically in the bush, even though it sounded like the voice was coming from the bush. I think that's the point. Other questions? All right, we got, I got one more. Wow, I guess I underprepared. I don't know how that happened. We'll have time for more questions. Beth, would you be willing to read this next one? This is from Midrash Tehillim, which is also, I want to say it's 11th or 12th century. So it's much later, but still, this is a great passage. Go ahead.
Another interpretation. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Psalms 10:3-1.
Yeah, that's by the way, that's a Psalm 103. This is interpreted. Midrash Tehillim is organized by Psalm. That's the Psalm that we say on Rosh Chodesh days. It's the Psalm for Rosh Chodesh, Barchina, and it opens Barchina V'shiat Adonai, and closes with the same line. So bless the Lord, O my soul. Go ahead.
Okay. Just as no person knows where the place of this soul is, so too with the Holy One, blessed be he. No creature knows where his place is. Not even the heavenly creatures who are responsible for the throne of glory know where God's place is or where he dwells. And what do they say? Blessed is the presence of the Lord in his place. Okay.
No, this is just so great. This is packed full of riches here. So again, Barchi nafshi et Adonai is the quote, bless the Lord, O my soul. May my soul bless God, which is a sort of a curious construction. Why does it say this? And the suggestion here, by the way, is exactly, you might say, just the opposite of the last one. Okay, so what was the conclusion here in this midrash? God is everywhere. God's presence is found in every location, in bushes and trees, and in the air and so forth. What's the message here? God is nowhere. We don't know where God's place is, right? Okay, you could say those are I guess flip sides of the same idea, but God is everywhere and nowhere. Now, what's the interesting thing about the second quote? So the second one, in Midrash, by the way, a lot of these later Midrashim, they're very complex in that they bring together lots of different ideas and different quotes and different passages. So the one that we see here, you all know this line, Baruch Kavod Adonai Mimkomo, which we say in the Kedusha, a couple of periods at a couple of places in our liturgy, but most notably in the Kedusha, Baruch Kavod Adonai Mimakomo. We say that, whenever we recite the Amidah out loud in the repetition. And the scholars will tell us, by the way, that there's a kind of a scriptural error perhaps in that text, but ignore that. Let's take it at face value. It's hard to translate. Praised is God, Baruch Kavod Adonai, praised is the glory of God, Mimakomo, from God's place. Now this is significant because what's going on in Ezekiel? Anyone know what the context is? Ezekiel's chapter 1, 2, and 3. Anyone know? It's Ezekiel's vision of the chariot. Okay, Ezekiel has this vision, and where is Ezekiel, by the way? Not in Israel. Ezekiel is actually in Iraq, in Babylonia. And in fact, the argument that some have made about that, no, it's clear from the text that the reason that Ezekiel has this vision in Babylonia and not in Israel, because it's a justification of the fact that the Jews now live in diaspora. Again, this is Ezekiel is post-exilic, because after the destruction of the first temple. But again, in Jewish life, it could very easily be after the destruction of the second temple. But he's located after the Babylonians have destroyed the first temple. They've exiled to Jerusalem. Just to flip back here for a minute. So we're talking back in here. Okay, so there's 586 BC is the Babylonian destruction. So Ezekiel's writing sometime after that, and he's in Babylon. He's in Iraq. By the Nahal Kvar, the Kabar River, and he is and he has this vision, this ecstatic vision of God on the throne, and this chariot that lands, and it's got angels and lightning, and it's a very very important vision. And there's a whole, by the way, it launched a whole the vision of the Merkava, the chariot, launched this whole area of Jewish mysticism unto itself. And the symbolism of that line is that God is also there in Babylon, is not only in Israel. The Israelites are exiled, and God is with them as well. So how do we know where God is? Well, number one, God has whatever God's place is. Blessed be God in whatever God's place. And by the way, that place is also here with us. So here in diaspora. And so again, it brings together a couple of different ideas, a couple of intersecting ideas. Number one, that God is everywhere. And number two, we don't know where God is because God could be anywhere. And number three, God is not limited to the place in Jerusalem where we, historically thought God was supposed to be, right? God is also with us here in Iraq. Again, what this brings together for me is this idea of, we don't know where God is, but God is certainly with us wherever we are. I see there was something in the chat. Eileen says, if God is a human construct and she doesn't answer our big questions concerning good and evil, perhaps it's because we don't have the answers either. Well, yes, yes, we definitely do not have those answers. And in fact, the rabbis, so that's a consistent feature of not only human life, human existence, but of course, Jewish life as well. We continue to ask these questions. And we've been doing it throughout our history, throughout the history of Rabbinic Judaism. Maddie writes, wouldn't that mean that humanity is always searching for God, but never finding it, never finding God? Yes, thank you for that. I make fun of you. It's just funny. Yes, God, we're always searching for God. We're always searching for God, but never finding God. And yet God is all around us. I believe I might misquote the rabbi, but I'm pretty sure it's Menachem Mendel of Kotsk who says, "Where is God? God is wherever you look for God." I might be mangling the quote, but effectively, God is where you look. Where we look. When we are struggling I actually said this more or less in a sermon a few weeks ago. When we are yearning, that is where God is located. That is what has kept us alive and kept us together. So what we'll see. I'll tell you what. I'm going to stop the screen share for a minute and just try to wrap this up with a little bow here. I want to thank you all for joining me to learn today, because I love, as you can see, I love this material. Again, very different from what's in the Tanakh. We see God as being this kind of basic principle of life, which is not really described in rabbinic literature, but rather is just understood to be around us and with us, and a figure in the conversation, a part of the argument of the rabbis in the Beit Midrash, but also not intervening, right? Not there and not there, not acting, but just being there as a presence. And again, the word for presence, of course, is Shekhinah. God is dwelling among us, around us, and in us, and everywhere and nowhere, but not really, not with the sort of physical presence that we see in particular in the Torah. And that's really important for us moving forward, because it actually enables us, in some cases, following up on both what Maddie and Eileen spoke about, we're constantly engaged in this search. I mean, I think the rabbis did a really good thing by not limiting God to some kind of physical presence, by not saying, well, God is this figure that walks among us and tells us what to do, but by rather placing God everywhere and nowhere as this sort of indeterminate presence. We have to keep asking the question. We have to keep searching. And that's very much part of our struggle as Jews. And it's one reason I would propose that we are still here, because we are heavily engaged in that struggle. I see there's another chat from Audrey. As a young man, I babysat for some 40 years ago. Oh, a young man I babysat for some 40 years ago. I wasn't sure where the emphasis was. Is God in the room? Yes. Is God on the TV? Yes. Is God on me? Yes. Boy, he weighs light. Yes, exactly. We cannot perceive God. And in fact, the rabbis are clearly telling us that. We don't know how to perceive God or to understand God. And all the more so, that's going to play into, I think, what we'll see with the medieval and modern commentators, is this question of, we have to determine who God is for ourselves. We have to, on some level, create that relationship, because Judaism isn't really going to tell us. The rabbis aren't going to tell us what to believe. We have to, and it's that searching which is ultimately valuable. Other questions or thoughts or ideas? Yeah, go ahead, Eileen. Oh, can't hear you. Unmute. Oh, can't unmute. Wait, can you unmute?
Okay.
There you
All
are.
right.
Yeah.
All right. The whole thing throughout this whole conversation, where is God? It's been said that he, she, it is everywhere, but it's also in us. And I like the idea of God being that little pintele yid in us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
the little Jewish point within us. Yes.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. I mean, that speaks to us when we need it.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
I'm sure some of us have. I don't want to get personal here, but I'm sure some of us have probably thought at different times of our life we're getting a kind of a transmission in one way or another.
That's right. Yeah.
One of the challenges that I have faced, maybe that before I became a rabbi and a cantor, I got a master's degree in Bible and ancient Semitic languages at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and that approach to the Bible is purely scholarly. It's taken as understanding from the outset that the Torah is a human work, right? And I don't, that doesn't present an issue to me for my own religious purposes. It doesn't mean it didn't come from God. It just means that it's filtered through human interpretation. And in fact, who said the Bible is midrash? Was that Buber or Rosenzweig? I can't remember. We'll get to that. But as a report on, it's Heschel actually. Sorry, Rabbi Heschel.
Rabbi.
Yes,
as a report on Revelation, the Torah itself is a midrash.
That's the quote. Thank you, Rabbi Sugarman. I'm glad you're here. Yes, as a report on Revelation, the Torah itself is midrash. And what Heschel is saying is, yes, we know that the Torah is a human work. We know that even though the Torah tells us it's dictated to God from God to Moses on Mount Sinai, we still know that the human hand is evident. And so we have to understand that God is working through us. I mean, that's the way I understand it. I'm not telling you that that's how you should believe, but it's a theology that works for me. Other questions or observations? Chris, were you sort of, no, or are you saying goodbye? Okay. All right. Well, I'll tell you what, I think I think our time, it's always Heschel, says Betty. Yes, it's always Heschel. I think our time has evaporated. I appreciate your learning with me. Our next session is, I believe, January 10th, if I'm not mistaken. January 10th. It's actually not the first Tuesday, because that's right after New Year's Day, but rather the subsequent, the second Tuesday in January. So on that, at that time, we're gonna look at ideally some medieval commentators, some medieval rabbis, what they were saying about God, and we'll take it from there. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, I will get this Zoom. Tell your friends if they missed it. This will be up on the website as well and our YouTube channel, and also a reference to the source sheet. Take care. I will see you soon. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Rabbi.